Hello, and welcome to Tom Myers versus the rest of the world. A lot's been going on. President Biden did an interview with Howard Stern. I thought it was a good interview, but it took quite a bit of criticism, mainly from podcasters and comics who don't understand the concept of supporting a presidential candidate whose supporters don't decorate the walls of the Capitol with their own feces. I have a theory that they're also jealous of Biden because, historically speaking, he's the only man who could meet an 81 million person bring. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem continues to face backlash, not only for the story about her shooting her kid's dog, but also for stories she told in her book that weren't true. She says she's gone out and removed some of the items from her book, which is ironic given the title of the book is No Going Back. One of the items in question is that she met the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. It's easy to presume she's met him as she speaks with all the terror of anyone who's ever read the news on North Korean state TV. Coincidentally, No Going Back is what Kristi Noem said once she brought Cricket the dog to the gravel pit. The primary election occurred this week in my home state of Maryland. We're recording this on Tuesday, so voting's going on now as we're recording this, but it's likely that former Governor Larry Hogan will be the Republican nominee to succeed the retiring Democratic Senator Ben Cardin. We think we got rid of Larry Hogan, but now he's back, which basically means he is our equivalent to herpes. MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell says he has talked to a lot of Democrats who say they're not supporting Biden this November. I find that suspect, as the only Democrats who are willing to talk to him are the voices in his head. It was revealed that years ago, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. admitted to having a worm in his head that ate a part of his brain and died. Dead worm is actually the medical condition that explains why he has only 6 children, which is a low number for a Kennedy. In Washington, D.C., RFK Stadium is set to be demolished. That place holds a lot of sentimentality for the residents of the Baltimore, D.C. area, not the least of which is the memories of all the drugs done there during the annual HF Festival. The Ukraine funding bill was finally passed by the House and signed into law. The main objection came from very conservative Republicans who wanted to keep the military-grade weapons here in this country so we could continue to carry out public mass shootings. The northern lights were visible in most of the United States this past weekend. Reactions were mixed across the country. For example, in the South, they were greeted with shotguns because they thought it was another UFO invasion. And now, on with the show. Please join me in welcoming Chipp Jones, Polite Kitty, Ward Morrow, and Nicole Blessing.
Hey.
Hey, Tom.
Hey,
Hello.
how's everyone doing?
Good.
Good.
Yeah.
Worm free. I'm doing okay.
I know it's weird that's like it seems like that's the least bizarre thing that's going on in this particular campaign season. Like we're going to cover the the one main presidential candidate being on trial later this episode, but it seems like one candidate saying, "Oh, a worm ate part of my brain."
Right.
Like that's the new normal for 2024 now.
That's it. You know what's really weird about it is that that's the 3rd episode of the TV show House. You ever watched the Doctor show House?
Yes.
And the reason I know that is during that time when House is on, my wife was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And one of the original diagnoses they thought was that she had a cystosarcoma in her brain. So they thought that she might have had a worm. So it's like it came full circle for us this past couple of weeks. Like, oh, we know exactly what that is.
So what explains Donald Trump then?
Yeah, I don't know.
He's just about to say that.
Yeah.
I think the worm crawled up the other end with Trump, I think, to be fair.
Actually, I think his brain is all worm now, isn't it? It's like,
Pretty much.
yeah. It's just
One
one
long
big
squiggly.
one big hungry caterpillar inside his skull, just rattling around.
I mean, to eat a mushroom.
I mean, it's scary that like RFK Jr. is the one who has like the dead worm in his brain, and yet he sounds more coherent than Trump still.
Well, has there ever been any sort of psychological diagnosis on him? I mean, is he truly mentally ill?
Yeah,
You're going to have to
Yes.
narrow that down.
yeah, I don't think he's,
Well, I mean, in just watching this particular trial, it's like he is a hindrance to his own defense.
yeah, I mean, he probably, if somebody were to let him, if he were to let himself be diagnosed, he would probably have some kind of personality disorder. But that's not, he's never going to let that happen. So,
I mean, we pretty much know he does, but
right.
that's
Well, yeah, but I mean, the degree of cognitive decline is really in question at this point.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, he's always been heavily on the narcissistic scale, so I don't know. Is that considered a mental illness? I mean, for most of us, we would, when we interact with him, we think it's a mental illness. But
all in all, what's even scarier is that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the youngest of the candidates.
mhm,
So we've got that to look forward to this November.
that's it.
It is the official position of this podcast that this is, in fact, an election interference case. Because this podcast is not backed by major corporations and is essentially something I write in my spare time, I'm not worried about pissing off any major entities or even ruffling the feathers of any Russian troll bots or troll farm communities because no one can ruin my online reputation more than I've already done so myself. Donald Trump has had support in his criminal trial. This week, Senators J.D. Vance of Ohio and Tommy Tuberville of Alabama supported him, as well as Attorney Generals Brenna Byrd of Iowa and Steve Marshall of Alabama. They were there to support him. Earlier this week, Vivek Ramaswamy, the former presidential candidate, is also scheduled to be there to show his support for him. I like how all of his supporters are supporting him in the same way you would keep watch over a dying relative hoping for a piece of the inheritance. While he was there, Tommy Tuberville described the courthouse in New York City as the most depressing thing. It says something about Tuberville that his only New York connection is a criminal court. Plus, if he really wants to see something depressing, he should go to a comedy open mic in the Village on a weeknight.
Mhm.
Keith Davidson was the lawyer for Stormy Daniels and helped arrange the hush money payment between herself and Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former lawyer and fixer. One of the TV news talking heads described Davidson's efforts as a big practice of sleazy junk, which is coincidentally how my last date described my genital region. One of Donald Trump's claims is that one of the times he called Michael Cohen was a butt dial. That's disproved by the fact that his ass is more likely to eat the phone rather than dial it.
Mhm.
Donald Trump is said to have farted a lot during his trial. In fact, studies show that he has pumped so much gas that oil companies are expected to tap his intestines for reserves. There is the possibility that Trump may get put in jail if he keeps violating the gag orders of the trial judge Juan Marchand. In response, Mayor Eric Adams says the city is ready to shoulder the burdens necessitated by the jailing of a former president of the United States. It's an historic moment, as that's the first time that Eric Adams has said anything and New Yorkers responded, "Oh, that's good to know."
Jeez.
Ward, as the only trial lawyer here, to the best of my knowledge, do you really see this trial having an impact that no matter what the verdict is on the electorate?
No, because people know Donald Trump. They've made up their mind. They like him. They don't like him. And I think they look at this as it's old news. I mean, Bill Clinton does, 0.1% of this. And, there's calls for his head. But Trump does it, and evangelicals flock to him. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And in all the trials I ever did, I never saw a defendant fall asleep. I saw some, kind of mess themselves. I saw some of them try to run, but never fall asleep. I guess the My Pillow guy, might come in handy for him or something. But I've never seen a defendant fall asleep. That was really pretty shocking.
I also see it's the irony that, like, in 2016, his big thing with Hillary Clinton was lock her up, put her on trial, and then in 2020, he calls Joe Biden Sleepy Joe. And like all of this is just okay. The self-projection aspect of this is
Right.
just, it's beautiful. I love it.
And yet nobody's calling him, Sleepy Don. I mean,
Right.
you would
they
think
are
that would be
s-
the headline.
It makes you think that maybe he's a bit psychic. I mean, he called all these things. he just ascribed them to the wrong persons, but he told us the future.
But his supporters are saying that real men wear diapers. They've made signs.
Oh man,
I want to make signs about wearing diapers and being for it.
that's right. I'm looking for a whole bunch of preschoolers to start running for president.
I would vote for them.
They have a better grasp of reality,
That's
I
right.
think. Plus, kids are way more cooler than adults.
That's right.
Why do we wait until people are adults before they vote? Adults fuck shit up. We've seen this.
Yeah.
And kids are not going to lie to you.
Well, that's going to open a whole big can of worms, with huggy lobbyists, I mean, it's just going to be crazy.
No pun intended, right, Chipp?
Yeah.
Sorry.
In the days following Trump's various arrests and indictments, the media has been on a tightrope trying to cover the first criminal trial of a former president of the United States as if it's a regular news story. Some of the on-air talking heads, however, have had enough, as former RNC chair Michael Steele demonstrates in this clip.
Watching this from afar, if you saw Donald Trump behind bars, cuffed or, frog walked out of that courtroom, I mean, his numbers would go sky high, his fundraising would go off the charts. Does he have an unlimited amount of people willing to put money into his pocket to pay for his trials?
Well, let's do it and find out. Why are we concerned? Why are we concerned about how much money he raises off of a perp walk? Why are we concerned how much ire is cast upon the system by his sycophantic followers? If the justice system is doing its justice correctly and fairly, those of us in the political space will know, okay, that's a political problem for him. And it's a political opportunity for his opponents. That's the politics of this. But our system shouldn't be beholden, Andrea, to concerns about whether or not Donald Trump raises money and his numbers go up if the system is doing what it's supposed to do. And if he is convicted, then in my view, all of the entrapments of being a former president should be stripped away. So there is no concern about security in a jail cell, because then he's a convicted felon. He's not a former president.
I would love to see more of this, and we're just not seeing it on supposedly liberal networks like MSNBC and CNN has its own issues. They've been taken over by a very, very conservative owner. Their lineup's been changed, but of all people, it's a former mainstream Republican who has to go ahead and say, hey, this is a possibility. This might happen. We should be talking more about this.
Yeah, well, I mean, Steele has definitely softened his conservatism. It's ironically because he's the one who actually put them in the position that they are now. He's the one that changed their focus to local elections and to school boards and stuff and building from the ground up, and then they sort of threw him under the bus and threw him out. So I think he unlike a lot of the conservative talking heads, feels no allegiance except to what he really believes in the truth. So that's why he can say that kind of stuff,
Well, I'd also say Steele is clearly multiple degrees of IQ higher than anybody else in the Republican Party that's
Right.
still there. I also noted in the video in the back he had a Johns Hopkins hat on, so he is well educated. But the point here is that you've got somebody like that who can look at this, and when he said, "Go ahead, convict him, and let's watch the numbers go up," I think he knows something, which is I don't believe there are these neutral people out there not sure if they like Donald Trump or not. But if he goes to jail, I'm going to really love him. I think you either love Trump or you don't. I don't think that there's many people that are going to make the numbers go up any higher than they are now simply because he goes to jail. If anything, I think they go down some. Maybe not a lot, but some.
It's true. I do agree with him in theory. I love his theory, but the political justice system, won't do its job. It doesn't do its job for the common person like, myself. So why is it going to work for him? I mean, we should keep track of how much money he's got, because if he's got the money, then he's just going to buy his way out like everybody else.
I do feel like we're sort of through the looking glass, because now I agree with this person that I didn't for so very, very long. And I guess I'm personally rather skeptical of the polls, because it's, we've established there is a bias within the reporting news organizations. So how are these surveys, how are these polls being conducted? Who's being contacted? It doesn't really seem like we're being presented the news as more we're being presented an episodic Bravo series at this point.
Right. I mean, the problem with polls is the data that you get is from the people that answer polls, and so that is not a real clear. I don't think there's a real clear study that is an actual indication of the general public at large.
It can't be. I mean, when I was a kid, people would call the house and ask who you were going to vote for, and I'd be like, whoever, I would just
Mrs. Morrow, my
pick
fourth
one.
grade teacher. I'm voting for her.
Oh, no, I would not say that. No, I would pick a candidate, but it would never be the same candidate. So somebody would call and be like, okay, I'm a Republican today. I'm voting for this. Somebody would else call, say, a couple hours later, oh no, I'm, voting for this Democratic candidate. What did I care? I was 12.
And you were still trolling pollsters then. That's awesome.
Right. That's awesome, right? Yeah. But she's
I
the
would just
reason.
like to
She's
go-
the reason that Ronald Reagan was elected.
I'm not that old, sir.
This isn't to say that there isn't any resistance to the Trump election interference case. In this clip, we see right-wing activist and Trump apologist Laura Loomer leading a protest outside the courthouse in the single digits, which, coincidentally, is their collective IQ.
Donald Trump did nothing wrong! 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 And we're going to be here every single day talking to all of you fake news media freaks and letting you know that Donald Trump did nothing wrong until you start to report the truth. Judge Merchan's wife literally works for Letitia James. Michael Cohen's lawyer, Andrew Lawford, his Twitter profile banner is a photo of him with Letitia James talking about how they talk about getting Trump. He said that he had fundraisers for Kamala Harris. Tell me that this isn't a witch hunt. How is this fair? How is this fair to Donald Trump?
Keep exposing them, Laura.
I mean, I've heard less awkward silence
I know.
at a comedy open mic when a comedian has dropped the N-bomb on stage. And by the way, Laura, if you're listening to this podcast for some weird reason, this isn't a witch hunt.
Yeah, I mean, you think I immediately think just because someone says something doesn't mean it's a witch hunt. I'm sure there are prosecutors in Chicago and New York that were talking about getting mobsters and gangsters, and nobody was out in front of the court for Gotti going, "This is a witch hunt. He didn't do anything wrong." The prosecutors
Well, back then they were more subtle about
just after
their
him.
disagreements with prosecutors. To be fair,
Well, I wouldn't call them witch hunts, but when you're talking about mobsters, yeah, prosecutors are going after people they think are committing, organized crime.
Right.
So, it's not a witch hunt. That's their job.
And this is what this prosecutor is doing. They're going after somebody who did business fraud. So it's like, that's the whole thing, is that when you start characterizing someone who's actually doing their job as a witch hunt, it's like, okay.
But that seems to be part of their strategy, to say that, oh, all of this is politically motivated, not because I broke the law, but because they want to stop me from being on the campaign trail. I mean, he openly admitted that, oh, yes, I did this, and tried to justify it. Well, I paid him, I just paid my lawyer a retainer. It's like, but then it wasn't really a retainer. Michael Cohen says it's not a retainer, that it was used as a payoff. So, I mean, is this now the Tony Soprano School of Law? I mean, what the hell is even happening?
Yeah, the legitimate thing that I'd love to see is have him take the stand. Have him say, hey, yeah, I paid her off. There's nothing wrong with that. I did nothing wrong. Please come in and confess and tell us that you did nothing wrong. See how long the jury will be out after that. Well,
he can't do that, because if he says I paid her, then he did do something wrong. I mean, the whole thing is
exactly.
It's the cover up that gets him. If it had been done as an open payment, that's not illegal. What's illegal is it's fraud, because they characterized it and they documented it as something different. And that's why people are trying to make this correlation with the money that Clinton paid Paula Jones. That was an open settlement in a case. Everyone knew it was going to Paula Jones, which is different than what Trump did by saying, oh, well, this is a retainer to my lawyer. It has nothing to do with the money my lawyer gave to Stormy Daniels. And it's like, well, no. if you paid Stormy Daniels through your lawyer, that's not a retaining fee.
The pitiful turnout of pro-Trump supporters in Manhattan was made even worse when even the son of a former mayor of said city is drowned out by one heckler.
We got to be out here for President Trump. Let them know they did nothing wrong. Let them know this is a political persecution by prosecution of the leading candidate for president of the United States. That's what's going on here. That's what's going on in the United States of America. The facts, think about this. They're so weak in this case that Joe Biden would not even bring this case. That's how bad this is. It took a Soros-funded district attorney in order to bring this case. There's no underlying felony.
I'm going to give you $5 here. It's
here's the deal. Here's the deal, my friend. That has nothing to do with it, my friend. What's the idea? What's the idea? No, that's okay. It's okay. I get it. It's fine, but it's done right. Here's the deal. There's no underlying felony in this case. All you need unbiased journalism.
This is really bad when you have more people trying to escort a heckler out of the way than listening to you.
Not having the educational background of civics, which a lot of people don't, it also helps further push their narrative that this is all the Democrats. The Democrats are doing this. Not that we're a country with laws, and if we don't enforce the laws that we have, then we're just, I don't know, just Las Vegas.
Or Florida. Or
some other place where things don't matter. But generations of people fought and died for this. And to just toss it all away for someone like Donald Trump is tragic.
Trump, he's shaking the system up for the little guy.
But if you really
that little guy.
Some of these talking points, I mean, who benefits from trying to make the U.S. government look, like little buffoonery? I mean, it doesn't matter. It's all a farce. I mean, that does sound like the talking points of Putin. And,
yes, it does.
If the mainstream media has failed to recognize the significance of this news story, then Fox is up to business as usual, as host Jesse Waters shows us with a faulty analogy in this clip.
And they caught him. They trapped him in a cage. We call it a courtroom, but it's a cage. And he's like King Kong. And they're sending Maddow down there, and she's looking at him like an animal. She's like, oh, man, his hair is really orange. Look at his eyes. Look at his lips. He's angry. He's mad. He's upset. Watching him. They're not providing any sort of legal analysis. Joy Reid went down there, and he's like, well, he's bigger than I thought he was. I mean, they're acting like it's like a zoo creature. And what happens with King Kong? You remember? Boom! It's not going to be good. So he's going to bust out of this cage eventually. They're not going to be able to keep him down.
They killed King Kong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He put a white woman on top of a building, and it was frowned upon in the 40s.
I don't think I saw the end of that movie.
Yeah, it was a...
I mean, I talk about all the time how I do this show basically in my spare time, but like even I go ahead and fact check stuff.
Okay, King Kong, that was not the 40s. That was 1933, and it was Fay Ray. And I feel like, yes, it was maybe frowned upon later, but in 1933, it was like a cinematic marvel. So yeah, they're even off on that.
It was remade, though. Come on.
Oh, it was remade multiple times, but they said the 40s. There wasn't
Right.
King Kong in the 40s. It was 1933. I feel like there must be some accuracy, or else let's just all sit here and be wrong.
That's right.
If we're going to be accurate about facts, it's going to be movie facts.
That's right. Yeah.
There's a level of irony here, though. You know, Trump was the owner, was it Miss USA or Miss America or whatever. I mean, he's into beauty pageants and all that. You know, he certainly talks about what people look like and oogles people and whatever.
Right.
You know, what Hillary wears or doesn't wear. But all of a sudden, it's like people are talking about this guy and the color of his hair, the color of his skin. You know, some man is being pulled apart in the same way that women have been pulled apart for generations. And it's, oh, this is some terrible thing. You know, it's fair play. If you're going to pick on one, then, you know, hey, buddy, you're going to get it coming back to you, and hopefully many times over.
And on that note, that's our show. I want to thank Chipp Jones, Polite Kitty, Ward Morrow, and Nicole Blessing.
Yay!
Thank you, Tom.
But before we go, my final thought. Welcome to yet another installment of our new series, Are You Better Off Today Than 4 Years Ago? Spoiler alert, the answer is going to be yes. If you feel like switching off this podcast now, which if you haven't already done so, congratulations and thank you for hanging in there. On this date, May 16th, restrictions on bars, restaurants, and public gatherings in general were slowly starting to be lifted in this country with a disease that had already killed 88,000 Americans. The Department of Health and Human Services, by this time, had awarded $11 billion to help testing for the disease, with $750 million of it going to tribal areas, despite the previous day's reporting of the Navajo Nation having the highest rate of infection per capita anywhere in the country, according to figures provided by the Centers for Disease Control. By this time 4 years ago, approximately 4.5 million cases were reported worldwide, with 310,000 deaths. Meanwhile, back in this country, ousted vaccine expert Dr. Rick Bright testified before Congress that the U.S. risked its darkest winter in modern history if we didn't step up our efforts to test for and contain the virus. All of this, of course, was a few months after Trump said this country would go from 15 cases to 0. Meanwhile, Italy, which is one of the first major epicenters of the virus, as well as the home of the free premium subscriptions to Pornhub during the lockdown, was also slowly starting to reopen. On the subject of reopening, the U.S. unemployment rate dropped to 13.3% as non-farm employment added 2.5 million jobs, with most of those being in the hospitality, construction, and retail industries, which were undergoing recovery, according to details provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Meanwhile, fuel demand continued to slowly increase with the gradual reopening of the country, this time 4 years ago, but prices still stayed below $2 per gallon for the remainder of the month, according to the website GasBuddy, as well as the U.S. Energy Information Administration. While lower than today, admittedly, just remember that 4 years ago today, less fuel was being consumed because nobody was going anywhere because, remember this, we were just going under lockdown for a contagious and severe respiratory virus. In short, are we better off today than we were 4 years ago? In case you need to be reminded, and of course some of you do, then the answer is yes. Good night. This episode was written and hosted by Tom Myers with panelists Chipp Jones, Polite Kitty, Ward Morrow, and Nicole Blessing. Theme music composed and arranged by Jeroen Vandenheren. Executive producers Tom Myers, Matt Connarton for ipmNation, and Eddie Carson for Odyssey Radio. Please leave a 5-star rating and a positive review on Apple Podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe to the Patreon Patreon.com/Tom Myers for ad-free episodes, extended episodes, and bonus clips. Thank you for listening, and please visit tommyers.us.